The night Adaeze turned 20, her mother disappeared. Not in the way people disappear when they walk outdoors and choose new lives. This was different. Sudden and silent, like a candle snuffed between wet fingers. One moment, her mother's laughter was filling their small kitchen in Lagos, warm as egusi soup on a cold harmattan evening. The next, nothing. A cold chair, a half-eaten plate, and a note that was not written in her mother's handwriting. Come to the old quarter. Come alone. Come before the cock crows 3 times.
Adaeze should have told someone. She should have woken her uncle, called her aunt, screamed into the street. Instead, she pulled on her green hoodie, the one her mother had bought her for her last birthday, and she walked into the dark. The old quarter of the city was a place people avoided the way they avoided conversations about death. The streets there were narrow and crooked, lined with buildings that leaned toward each other like conspirators. The air smelled of candle wax, old wood, and something else, something animal. She found the door without looking for it. That, she would later understand, was the first sign that she was already caught. The woman inside was ancient in a way that defied counting. Her face was a landscape of deep lines and sharp angles, her eyes the colour of old gold coins, her smile the kind that knew things it had no right knowing. She sat in a stone room lit by candles, surrounded by books with no titles, jars with no labels, and shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Adaeze. The old woman said her name like she had been practicing it. I have been waiting. Where is my mother? Adaeze's voice was steadier than she felt.
The woman tilted her head. Safe. For now. Whether she remains so, she let the silence do the rest of the work. I have a gift for you, child, a powerful tongue. With it, every word you speak
every promise binds, every curse lands. You will be extraordinary. And the price? The old woman's smile widened. Only this. You must never weep, not one tear, for if you cry, the gift turns. The serpent comes out, and it will not go back in easily. Adaeze stared at her. A normal girl would have run, but Adaze's mother was somewhere in this woman's keeping, and the candles were burning low, and the cock would crow 3 times before sunrise. Agreed, she whispered.
She did not know that the moment she said the word, a green serpent, small as a worm, slipped silently down her throat while she stood there in the dark. She felt only a slight warmth, like swallowed tea. She walked home before dawn, and by morning her mother was back in the kitchen, remembering nothing, humming to herself as if the whole night had been a strange and forgettable dream. 3 months passed, and the gift was everything the old woman had promised. Adaeze discovered its power by accident. First when she told her lecturer the homework was completed, and found it sitting neatly on her desk minutes later, done in her own handwriting. Then when she told a sick neighbour, "You will be fine by Friday." And he was, startlingly, bounding down the street come Saturday morning with colour in his cheeks. Then when a man who had been stealing from market women all year came close to her, and she said quietly, without thinking, "Everything you have taken will find its way back." And by the following week, every stolen item had mysteriously reappeared in the market stalls. Word spread in the quiet way important things always spread, through whispers and sideways glances. People began coming to her. A woman whose husband had vanished. A young man who needed work. A man, who could not stop coughing. Adaeze helped them all, careful and deliberate with every word, measuring each sentence the way a chemist measures compounds. But power has a gravity of its own. It pulls at everything around it, and not all of what it pulls is good.
Her best friend, Chisom, noticed the change first. "You're different," Chisom said one afternoon, watching Adaeze the way you watch someone you're not sure you recognise anymore. "You don't laugh the same. You don't cry at films anymore. You sat through the end of that movie last week, the one about the father and the daughter, and your eyes were completely dry. Who does that?" "I was just tired," Adaeze said. But Chisom was right, and Adaeze knew it. She had built a wall around her emotions, careful, deliberate, brick by brick, because the old woman's warning lived permanently in the back of her skull. Never weep. She had stopped watching sad films, stopped visiting the grandmother who always made her feel tender and weepy. She kept people at a careful distance, not out of coldness, but out of survival. She could not afford to feel too much. And then her mother got sick. Not a small sickness. Not the kind that bows to medicine and rest and good food. A sickness that arrived like a landlord, settled in and refused all notices to leave. The doctors used long, complicated words that all meant the same thing. We don't know, and we're worried. Adaeze sat at her mother's hospital bedside every evening, holding the hand that had braided her hair 1,000 times, that had steadied her bicycle, that had pressed cool cloth to her forehead during every childhood fever. She held that hand, and she kept her face still, kept her breathing even, kept the grief locked behind her sternum like a stone. She whispered every healing word she had, and some of them worked. Her mother's pain lessened, her colour improved on the better days, but the sickness was stubborn and deep, and Adaeze could feel the power in her words beginning to thin, like a battery running toward empty. She needed more, and she knew exactly where to get it. Going back to the old woman was the second worst decision Adaeze ever made. The first had been going in the first place. The stone room looked exactly the same, as if no time had passed, as if time itself had agreed not to visit. The candles burned at the same height. The shadows shifted the same way. The old woman's gold eyes tracked Adaeze from the moment she stepped through the door. "I need more," Adaeze said without greeting. "My mother is dying, and my words are weakening. I need the power renewed." "Of course you do." The woman's voice was warm with unsurprise. "And you want to negotiate? Name your price." The old woman was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, Adaeze felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "The price," the old woman finally said, "is someone else's grief. Bring me the tears of someone who loves you. Pour them into this jar." She held up a small glass vessel, dark and empty. "Their sorrow feeds the serpent. Your power is restored." "You want me to make someone cry? Someone who loves me?" "I want their tears, however they come." The smile again, knowing, ancient, without remorse. Adaeze took the jar. She told herself she would find another way, that she was only taking it to buy herself time to think. She told herself this all the way home. She did not find another way. The next evening, she sat with Chisom and very carefully, Very deliberately, she said things designed to wound. She brought up old insecurities, dug her words into soft places, watched her oldest friend's face crumple with the specific devastation of betrayal by someone you trusted completely. Chisom cried, deep and helpless, the way only the truly hurt can cry. Adaeze held the open jar beneath her friend's face in the guise of a hug. She felt sick the entire time. She felt sicker walking away. She returned the jar to the old woman that same night and felt the power surge back through her like electricity, burning and bright and terrible. She went straight to the hospital and spoke over her mother in the dark, word after careful word. And her mother opened her eyes the next morning and asked for rice and stew and complained about the hospital pillow, which meant she was genuinely improving. Adaeze should have felt relief. She felt instead like something had been permanently removed from her, something she had not known was there until it was gone. Chisom did not call, did not visit, left Adaeze's messages on read for 2 weeks, and then blocked her entirely. And at night, alone in her room, Adaeze felt the grief of it rising, wave after wave, pressing against the inside of her chest like water behind a cracked dam. She pressed her fists to her eyes. She breathed through it. She refused to let it break.
But grief, unlike power, cannot be bargained with. Grief does not negotiate. Grief arrives on its own schedule and leaves when it chooses. And it had been building in Adaeze for months. Her mother's illness, the isolation, the slow death of her own softness. And on the night she sat alone and truly understood what she had done to Chisom, her oldest and most faithful friend, it arrived all at once. The first tear fell before she knew it was coming.
She felt it immediately. A violent twist low in her throat, a burning, writhing pressure. She gasped and clapped her hand over her mouth, but it was already too late. The serpent, disturbed from its long rest, uncurled. It was no longer the size of a worm. The serpent emerged slowly, luminous green in the darkness of her room, its scales glowing with the eerie light of stolen power, its eyes ancient and without mercy. It hung from her mouth like a terrible tongue, heavy and alive, and Adaeze could not scream, because screaming meant opening her mouth wider, and opening her mouth wider was unthinkable. She ran through the streets in the deep part of night, the serpent swaying from her lips, people she passed stumbling backward in horror, and she ran toward the only place she knew to run. The old quarter, the stone room, the candles, the old woman with the gold eyes and the endless, terrible smile. The woman was waiting. She was always waiting. "Well," the old woman said, looking at the serpent with something that might have been satisfaction. "And so it comes to this." Adaeze could not speak with the serpent in her mouth. She stood in the doorway, shaking, her eyes streaming freely now, and she looked at the old woman with everything she had, every ounce of fury, grief, desperation, and the particular clarity that only arrives when you are completely out of options and completely out of pretending. The old woman tilted her head. Something in her expression shifted, subtle as a tide turning. "You want to know what removes it?" she said quietly. "Not more power, not a bargain." She paused. "A true apology. Not the kind spoken to me, spoken to the one you harmed." "The serpent feeds on power taken through cruelty," the old woman continued, and her voice had changed, stripped of its performance.
It cannot survive in a heart that genuinely turns back. But you must mean it. The gift knows the difference. It has always known the difference. Adaeze turned and walked back out into the night.
She stood outside Chisam's building for a long time, the serpent patient and glowing at her lips, the stars above Lagos indifferent to her shame. Then she buzzed the intercom. When Chisam's sleepy, guarded voice crackled through, "Who is this?" Adaeze pressed the button and made sounds, strange and muffled and urgent, and something in them must have carried enough meaning because the door buzzed open. Chisam appeared in the corridor in pyjamas, sleep-rumpled, and then suddenly, horrifyingly awake. She stared at the serpent. She took one step back, and then, because she was Chisam, because she had always been braver in the ways that actually counted, she took 2 steps forward. "Adaeze," she said, "what do you need?"
And Adaeze, tears running freely down her face now, no longer fighting them, reached out and took Chisam's hand. She could not speak, so she did the only thing she could do. She looked at her friend with the full and unguarded truth of her face. Remorse, pure and unmanaged. Love, frightened and real. The acknowledgement of a wound she had deliberately made in someone who had done nothing to deserve it. The serpent began, slowly, to retreat.
It took a long time. Chisam sat on the corridor floor and held Adaeze's hand through all of it, not asking questions, not flinching, just present, which was more than Adaeze had earned, and exactly what she needed. The glow faded from the scales. The serpent grew smaller and smaller still, and finally slipped back into whatever interior darkness it had come from, and Adaeze collapsed forward into her friend's arms and wept properly, fully, for the first.
"I don't forgive you tonight," Chisam said finally. "I want you to know that." "I know. But I'm not going anywhere either." A pause. "You're an idiot." "I know that too." Adaeze woke the next morning in Chisam's spare room, her throat empty and ordinary, her voice nothing more than her own voice again. No shimmer, no residual power, just sound shaped by breath and intention. The same ordinary instrument everyone else carried. She tested it carefully, said good morning to the empty room, and nothing happened, except the room received it and held it and let it go.
Her mother was still recovering. The healing Adaeze had spoken over her had been real, and it held. Whatever the source, whatever the cost, those words had done their work and would not be taken back. She visited the old quarter one last time, not to bargain, not to retrieve anything, but to look the old woman in the eye and say, "I understand now what you were." The old woman's expression, for once, was unreadable. "You were never testing my power," Adaeze said. "You were testing what I would do with it."
The gold eyes regarded her for a long moment. "Most don't make it to this room a 3rd time," the old woman said. "Most break before the serpent does." She turned away, toward her candles, toward her jars. "Go home, child." Adaeze went home. She and Chisam rebuilt their friendship slowly, the way you rebuild anything structural that has been damaged, carefully, with attention, without pretending the crack was never there. Some things between them were different afterward, and some things, tested and surviving, were stronger.